"Do not call anyone," Richard Vale said. Clara Bennett looked at him with one hand still resting beside the velvet box on the white linen table. Around them, the ballroom had gone quiet in the way wealthy rooms often did when embarrassment became more interesting than music. Crystal chandeliers glowed above 200 guests gathered for the anniversary gala of Vale Meridian Hotels. A string quartet had stopped between songs. Servers stood near the walls with silver trays held perfectly level. At the center of the room, Eleanor Price stared at the empty display stand where her diamond bracelet had been placed minutes earlier. "It was right there," she said. "I never moved it." Richard turned toward Clara. She wore the same black uniform as the other banquet servers, but she was the only one standing beside Eleanor's chair when the alarm spread through the room. Near her shoes lay a small velvet box that had slipped from her apron pocket. Richard bent, picked it up, and held it between two fingers. "Open your bag," he said. Clara's face lost color, but her voice remained controlled. "Sir, that box was given to me by Miss Cole." Vanessa Cole, the event director, stood several feet away beside the stage. She looked toward the floor. Richard noticed the silence and mistook it for confirmation. "You expect me to believe that?" "I expect you to check the cameras." Marcus Reed, head of hotel security, stepped forward. "Mr. Vale, we can secure the room and review every angle within minutes." Richard glanced at the guests watching from behind raised champagne glasses. Investors were present. Board members. Reporters from 2 business magazines. The hotel's reputation was being measured in real time, and he felt control slipping from his hands. He had built an empire by deciding faster than everyone around him. He did not know how to pause without feeling weak. "We do not need 15 camera angles to understand what is in front of us," he said. Clara looked at the velvet box. "Then open it." Richard did. Inside was a brass key attached to a faded leather tag. No diamonds. No bracelet. A murmur moved through the ballroom. For 1 second, uncertainty crossed his face. Then Eleanor pointed toward Clara's apron. "She may have hidden it somewhere else." Richard's embarrassment hardened into anger. "Empty your pockets." Clara removed her order pad, a pen, a folded napkin, and an old employee key card. "Nothing more." "I did not take anything," she said. "You were beside the table," Richard replied. "And you had that box." "Because Vanessa handed it to me." Every face turned toward the event director. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. Fear held her still. Richard saw hesitation again and chose the answer that protected him from looking wrong. "A thief always has a story." Clara's eyes lifted. "Do not call me that." His voice sharpened. "Then tell me where the bracelet is." "I do not know." "You expect this room to believe a banquet server just happened to be carrying a velvet box beside a missing diamond bracelet? I expect this room to believe evidence." The words landed harder than shouting would have. Richard stepped closer. "You do not lecture me in my hotel. Then do not accuse me without proof." The challenge was quiet, but public. Richard reacted before thought could catch him. He struck her once across the face. The sound was brief. Clara turned with it, one hand rising to her cheek. No one moved. Marcus looked stunned. Vanessa pressed her fingers against her lips. Richard stared at Clara as though he had only just understood what he had done. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She reached into her pocket, removed her phone, and dialed a number from memory. Richard lowered his hand. "Who are you calling?" Clara kept her eyes on him. "My father." He gave a cold, uneasy laugh. "And what exactly do you think he can do?" The call connected. Clara spoke with measured calm. "Dad, I need you to preserve every security recording from the Vale Meridian Anniversary Gala." Richard's expression changed. Clara continued. "Richard Vale just struck me inside the hotel you never truly gave away." The color left his face. He knew only one man who could lock the company's records without his approval. Only one man still held special voting rights over ethics and governance. Jonathan Bennett, the co-founder whose name had been removed from the lobby, but never from the company's foundation. 3 hours earlier, Clara Bennett entered the Vale Meridian Grand through the employee entrance beneath a gray Boston sky. The hotel occupied an entire city block, its stone facade polished for the anniversary gala, and its brass doors reflecting lines of arriving town cars. Inside the service corridor, fluorescent lights replaced chandeliers, and the air smelled of coffee, linen starch, and fresh flowers waiting to be arranged. Clara signed in, tied her black apron, and checked the brass key in her locker before closing the door. The key was old, heavier than the electronic cards used throughout the hotel, with a faded leather tag stamped with the number 12. Her father had given it to her when she began the hospitality program. The first Vale Meridian had 12 rooms, Jonathan Bennett had told her. Remember that every large company begins with someone carrying towels up a narrow staircase. Clara had never told her co-workers what the key meant. She did not want a title borrowed from her father, and she did not want special treatment from a company he no longer controlled day to day. She wanted to understand the hotel from the places where guests rarely looked. Banquet setup, room service, laundry, front desk overflow, work measured in steps, timing, and small decisions that could not be learned from a classroom alone. Vanessa Cole met the staff near the ballroom doors with a clipboard pressed tightly against her chest. "Tonight must be flawless," she said. "Mr. Vale will be watching everything." The servers exchanged quiet looks. Richard Vale's inspections were famous inside the company. He noticed fingerprints on glassware, flowers placed half an inch too far left, and employees who failed to smile quickly enough. What he did not notice, Clara had learned, was how fear changed the room before he entered it. People stopped reporting problems. Managers corrected appearances instead of causes. Mistakes did not disappear. They simply learned where to hide. During the final setup, Clara carried champagne flutes past a display table near the stage. Eleanor Price's diamond bracelet would be presented there beside a leather guest book before the charity auction. Marcus Reed had requested a locked case, but Vanessa rejected it because the glass reflected badly in photographs. "Security will remain within sight," she said. Marcus looked unconvinced. Clara noticed the temporary storage cabinet beneath the table did not latch properly. She tested it once, then called Vanessa over. "The lock is not catching." Vanessa pushed the door closed with her knee. It opened again by less than an inch. "Maintenance already checked it. It is still loose." Vanessa glanced toward the ballroom entrance, where Richard had just arrived with board members and reporters. Her shoulders tightened. "Do not create a problem 5 minutes before guests enter. I am trying to prevent one. Then keep an eye on the table." Vanessa walked away before Clara could answer. Across the ballroom, Richard moved through the room without slowing. Staff straightened as he passed. He spoke briefly to Marcus, corrected the position of a floral arrangement, and asked why the orchestra had not begun warming up. No one mentioned the broken latch. Clara watched him from beside the service station. He looked exactly as he did in business magazines: tailored navy suit, silver watch, controlled expression. Yet the room around him told a different story. Every employee seemed to breathe only after he turned away. Jonathan had once described Richard as brilliant, relentless, and unable to distinguish silence from agreement. Clara had wondered whether that judgment was fair. By the end of the evening, she intended to know. When the ballroom doors opened, guests entered beneath warm light and soft music. Clara lifted a tray of sparkling water and stepped into the crowd, carrying her father's old key in her apron and one quiet rule in her mind. Watch what people do when they believe no one important is watching. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom had filled with donors, executives, and longtime guests of Vale Meridian hotels. Clara Bennett moved between the tables with a tray of sparkling water, noticing the details most people overlooked. A guest near the stage asked twice for a chair with better back support. A junior server nearly collided with a floral stand because Vanessa Cole had narrowed the service path to make room for more photographs. One of the ballroom doors kept catching against the carpet. Each problem was small. Each one was ignored because Richard Vale was nearby. He stood beneath the largest chandelier speaking with a board member while staff adjusted themselves around his presence. Vanessa checked the room every few seconds, not for guests, but for signs that Richard might be displeased. When a waiter dropped a spoon near the kitchen entrance, the sound was barely audible, yet 3 employees turned toward Richard before helping. Clara saw what her father had meant. Silence in the company was not peace. It was caution. Eleanor Price arrived shortly after the opening remarks began. She wore the diamond bracelet on her left wrist, an heirloom she had offered for a brief display before the charity auction. Marcus Reed escorted her to the presentation table. The bracelet was placed on a velvet stand beside the leather guest book, close enough for photographs, but farther from the nearest security camera than Marcus preferred. "I still recommend the locked case," he told Vanessa. "It makes the display look cold," she replied. "This is a gala. not an evidence room. Marcus lowered his voice. The cabinet beneath the table does not lock. Then do not use it. We need somewhere secure during the speeches. Vanessa glanced toward Richard, who was approaching with two investors. Handle it without making it visible. Richard joined them before Marcus could respond. Is there a problem? He asked. Vanessa smiled immediately. Nothing we cannot manage. Clara stood 6 feet away with a tray balanced at shoulder height. She watched Marcus look at the loose cabinet door, then at Richard. The temporary storage setup is not ideal, he said. Richard barely glanced at the table. Then make it ideal. He continued walking. Vanessa exhaled only after he passed. You heard him, she said. Marcus looked at her. He did not approve this. He approved the result. Clara placed 2 glasses on a nearby table. The result is still a cabinet that does not lock. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. You were told to serve. I am serving. I am also standing beside a valuable item with no secure storage. Then stay beside it until I tell you otherwise. The orchestra shifted into a softer piece as Richard stepped onto the stage. His speech began with the story of a 12-room hotel opened decades earlier by 2 men who believed luxury should feel personal. He mentioned Jonathan Bennett only once, calling him an early partner who later chose a quieter life. Clara looked toward the brass key beneath her apron. Her father had not chosen a quieter life. He had chosen distance after Richard began treating employees as replaceable parts of a growing machine. On stage, Richard spoke about discipline, expansion, and excellence. Guests applauded. Behind them, a banquet captain whispered that the kitchen was short 2 servers. Vanessa told him to make do. Marcus returned to the display table and checked the cabinet again. The latch failed. I am moving the bracelet after the photographs, he said. Vanessa nodded, but her attention was on Richard's speech. Clara saw Eleanor remove the bracelet briefly so a photographer could capture the clasp against the velvet stand. Then a donor called Eleanor toward the guest book. The bracelet remained on the table. Vanessa looked at it, then toward Richard, who had finished speaking and was walking directly toward the display. Fear crossed her face. She opened the cabinet, saw it would not close, and reached for a small velvet box from the gift table. Clara, she said quickly, pressing it into her hands, hold this for me. What is inside? Just keep it safe for 5 minutes. Before Clara could answer, Vanessa moved toward Richard with a practiced smile. Clara slipped the box into her apron and stayed near the table as instructed. She did not see Vanessa move the bracelet. She did not see Marcus called away by a guest near the entrance. She only saw the display stand become empty a few minutes later, and Eleanor return with confusion spreading across her face. Where is it? Eleanor asked. Vanessa stopped walking. Richard turned toward the table. Every nearby conversation began to fade. Eleanor Price stared at the empty velvet stand as though the room had shifted beneath her. The bracelet was here less than 5 minutes ago, she said. Marcus Reed moved toward the display table at once. No one leaves the ballroom until we review the camera footage. His tone was calm, but the guests nearest the stage had already begun turning toward one another. Richard Vale stepped beside Eleanor and looked at the table, the loose cabinet door, and the staff gathered nearby. Who was assigned to this area? He asked. Vanessa Cole answered too quickly. Clara. Clara Bennett felt the small velvet box inside her apron. She looked at Vanessa, waiting for her to explain. Vanessa did not meet her eyes. I was told to remain near the table, Clara said. Richard turned toward her. Were you here when the bracelet disappeared? Yes, but I did not see anyone take it. Did you leave the table? Only to serve the guests beside it. Eleanor pressed one hand against her chest. That bracelet belonged to my mother. Clara looked at her. I am sorry, ma'am. Security should check every camera before anyone is blamed. Marcus nodded. That is exactly what we should do. Richard glanced around the ballroom. The orchestra had stopped. Reporters stood near the back, pretending not to listen. Board members watched him with the silent expectation that he would make the disorder disappear. How long will that take? He asked. A few minutes to secure the recordings and identify the relevant angles. A few minutes is enough for someone to move the bracelet. Marcus kept his voice measured. The exits are covered. Richard's eyes returned to Clara. He noticed the shape of the box beneath her apron. What are you carrying? Clara touched the pocket. A box Vanessa gave me. Every face nearby turned toward Vanessa. Her lips parted, but no explanation came. Richard held out his hand. Give it to me. Clara removed the small velvet box and placed it on the table. She told me to keep it safe for 5 minutes. Vanessa finally spoke. I was handling several things at once. I do not remember exactly what I gave her. Clara stared at her. You placed it in my hands. I may have asked you to move a gift box. You said to keep it safe. Richard looked from one woman to the other. The uncertainty should have slowed him. Instead, it irritated him. Open it, Eleanor whispered. Richard lifted the lid. The brass key lay inside beneath the soft lining, its faded leather tag marked with the number 12. Confusion passed through the small crowd. What is that? Richard asked. Clara answered carefully. It belongs to my family. Why was it inside a jewelry box? I do not know. Vanessa gave me the box closed. Vanessa shook her head. I never saw that key. Clara felt the trap forming, not because anyone had planned it well, but because fear had made silence easier than truth. Marcus reached for the box. Let me secure this and review the cameras. Richard pulled it back. Not yet. He looked at Clara's apron. Empty your pockets. There is nothing else in them. Then you should have no objection. Clara removed her order pad, pen, folded napkin, employee key card, and phone. No bracelet. Marcus looked toward the ballroom doors. That does not prove anything either way. Richard heard only the part that failed to clear the embarrassment. She was beside the table. She had a velvet box. The bracelet is gone. Those facts do not equal guilt, Clara said. His jaw tightened. You are in no position to tell me what facts mean. Then let the cameras tell you. Eleanor looked from Clara to Vanessa. Did either of you move it? Vanessa remained silent. Clara answered, no. Richard saw the silence beside her and chose the easier target. Someone here is lying. Clara met his eyes. Then find out who before you decide it is the person wearing an apron. The sentence was quiet, but it stripped away the excuse of confusion. Richard stepped closer, anger replacing judgment. Around them, no one spoke. The ballroom waited to see whether power would pause long enough to search for truth. Richard Vale stepped closer until only the display table stood between him and Clara Bennett. You were responsible for this area, he said. A valuable bracelet disappears, and a jewelry box is found in your pocket. Clara kept her hands at her sides. A box given to me by the event director. Vanessa Cole looked toward the floor. Richard noticed the movement, but pride had already chosen its direction. Miss Cole has managed events for this company for 15 years. That does not make her memory more reliable than the cameras. A few guests shifted uneasily. Marcus Reed moved beside Richard. Sir, the recordings are being secured now. We should move this conversation away from the ballroom. Richard looked toward the reporters near the entrance. One held a phone at chest level. Another whispered to a photographer. The evening he had planned as proof of the company's stability was becoming a public question about his control. No, he said. We resolve it here. Marcus lowered his voice. Public certainty without evidence can create a larger problem. Richard turned sharply. Then find the evidence. That requires time. You have had time. It was unfair, and everyone near him knew it. The bracelet had been missing for only minutes. Clara watched the fear travel through the staff. No one corrected Richard when he was wrong. They waited for the safest version of his anger to pass. Mr. Vale, she said, you are not investigating. You are choosing the person with the least power to defend herself. His expression hardened. You think this is about your position? I think my uniform made your decision easier. Eleanor Price looked at Clara more carefully. Were you ever alone with the bracelet? No, ma'am. Did you touch it? No. Vanessa drew a shallow breath. Clara turned toward her. Tell them why you gave me the box. Vanessa's fingers tightened around her clipboard. I was busy. That is not an answer. Richard held up one hand. You do not question my director. Clara faced him again. Then question her yourself. His voice rose. You are the one carrying the box. And she is the one who gave it to me. Enough. The word crossed the room more loudly than the music had. Richard lifted the brass key from the velvet lining and examined the faded number 12. Something about it felt familiar, but embarrassment would not allow curiosity to slow him. Where did this come from? My father gave it to me. Convenient. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. There is nothing convenient about being accused by a man who refuses to look at evidence. Richard heard a murmur from the nearest table. He looked toward the board members watching him, then back at Clara. A thief always believes confidence will sound like innocence. Clara's face changed, not with panic, but with a quiet boundary being crossed. Do not call me that. Then tell me where the bracelet is. I already told you. I do not know. You were standing beside it. So were several guests. So was Vanessa. So was security. But the box was in your pocket. Because she put it there. Vanessa remained silent. Richard mistook that silence for support. You expect everyone here to believe that? Clara looked around the ballroom. I expect anyone here with judgment to wait for proof. His authority had been challenged before, but never by someone he had already decided was beneath the argument. He stepped around the table. You do not lecture me in my hotel. Clara did not move. Then do not use your hotel as permission to humiliate an employee. The words reached the room before Richard's restraint did. He struck her once across the face. The sound was brief, followed by a silence that seemed to remove every other sound from the ballroom. Clara turned slightly, one hand rising to her cheek. Richard's anger vanished almost at once, leaving only the realization of what 200 people had witnessed. Marcus stared at him. Eleanor whispered, Richard. Vanessa's clipboard lowered. Clara looked back at Richard, her eyes steady. Now there are two things the cameras need to preserve. She reached for her phone. Richard's voice lost its certainty. Who are you calling? Someone who understands why evidence must be protected before powerful people decide what it says. She dialed from memory. The call connected. Dad, she said, lock every security recording from the Vale Meridian Anniversary Gala. Richard Vale has accused me of theft and struck me inside the hotel you never truly gave away. Richard stared at the brass key marked 12. The forgotten shape of the first hotel key returned to him, along with the name he had spent years reducing to a footnote. Jonathan Bennett. For several seconds, Richard Vale did not speak. The brass key rested in his palm, heavier now than it had been moments earlier. He remembered the narrow lobby of the first Vale Meridian property, 12 rooms above a struggling restaurant, and Jonathan Bennett working beside him before sunrise because they could not afford enough staff. Jonathan had designed the service standards Richard later turned into a national brand. He had also written the governance clause that protected employee records, ethics investigations, and internal evidence from executive interference. Richard had treated those rights as ceremonial. Now Clara Bennett stood before him with Jonathan's key and Jonathan's eyes. You are his daughter, Richard said. Clara lowered the phone only after her father confirmed that the recordings were locked. Yes. A murmur moved across the ballroom. Richard looked at Vanessa Cole, then at Marcus Reed. Why was I not told? Clara answered before either of them could. Because my name should not decide whether I deserve fair treatment. Richard opened his mouth, but no defense came. Marcus stepped closer. The data lock is active. No footage can be deleted, edited, or released without dual authorization. Richard looked at Clara's phone. Your father still has that authority? He never surrendered it. The answer carried no triumph. That made it harder to dismiss. Eleanor Price moved toward Clara, her expression troubled. Are you all right? I am steady, Clara said. She did not remove her hand from her cheek, but she did not describe pain or ask for sympathy. Her attention remained on the evidence. Please make sure no one leaves with access to the display area records. Marcus nodded. Already done. Richard regained enough composure to address the room. The gallows paused. Guests may remain seated while security reviews the recordings. His voice sounded formal, almost familiar, but the authority behind it had changed. No one was watching him because he controlled the situation. They were watching to see whether he would accept what he had done. Vanessa approached him quietly. Richard, we should move this into a private office. Clara looked at her. That would be easier for everyone except the people who just watched me be accused. Vanessa's face tightened. Richard knew Clara was right. The accusation had been public. The evidence could not be hidden behind a closed door simply because the truth had become inconvenient. We stay here, he said. Marcus signaled to a security technician near the rear of the ballroom. A large monitor used for gala presentations changed from the anniversary logo to a grid of camera feeds. The first angle showed Eleanor removing the bracelet and placing it on the velvet stand. The second showed Clara serving guests several feet away. The third showed Vanessa opening the loose cabinet beneath the table, then closing it unsuccessfully. Vanessa's breathing changed. I was trying to secure it, she said. Marcus did not answer. He advanced the footage. Vanessa picked up the small velvet box from the gift table, turned away from the main camera, and walked toward Clara. The next angle showed her placing the box in Clara's hands. Richard looked at Vanessa. You said you did not remember. I panicked. Why? She looked toward the monitor. Because the cabinet was not working, and I had already told everyone it was fine. Marcus continued. Another angle showed Vanessa returning to the display table after Clara moved away. Her body blocked the bracelet from view for several seconds. Then a donor approached, forcing her to step aside. The stand appeared empty. Eleanor drew a sharp breath. Where did it go? Marcus froze the image. We need the lower camera. The screen changed. A camera mounted near the stage floor showed the edge of the table from below. As Vanessa adjusted the loose cabinet door, the bracelet slid from the velvet stand through a narrow gap in the display platform and disappeared into a hidden compartment built into the table. No one had taken it. Marcus walked to the display, pressed beneath the frame, and opened a shallow panel. The bracelet lay inside, untouched. Eleanor covered her mouth. Vanessa closed her eyes. Richard looked at Clara, then at the room that had accepted his certainty because he had spoken it loudly enough. There was no theft, Marcus said. Clara lowered her hand from her cheek. No, she replied. There was only an accusation looking for someone easy to carry it. The bracelet rested on Eleanor Price's open palm while the ballroom absorbed the truth. No thief. No hidden scheme. Only a loose display panel, a frightened manager, and a powerful man who had chosen certainty before evidence. Richard Vale looked at Clara Bennett, but she did not offer him relief. Her calm made the room feel more honest than any apology could. Vanessa Cole stood beside the display table with both hands wrapped around her clipboard. I should have told you the cabinet was not working, she said. Richard turned toward her. You should have told me the moment you knew. Vanessa nodded, but Clara spoke before the blame could settle into another easy direction. She should have told the truth, Clara said, but asked why she believed telling the truth was more dangerous than hiding the problem. Richard's eyes moved toward her. That does not excuse what she did. No, it explains the system that made it likely. Marcus Reed closed the security panel and returned the bracelet to Eleanor. The equipment issue was reported twice this month, he said. Vanessa looked at him. Richard's expression changed. Reported to whom? Facilities. Then event operations. Vanessa lowered her eyes. I closed the maintenance request because the gala budget was already over. Why? Richard asked. She gave a tired, humorless breath. Because every department head knows what happens when bad news reaches you before a major event. The words did not accuse him loudly. They did not need to. Richard looked around the ballroom and saw employees avoiding his eyes. He had spent years believing they respected his standards. Now he understood how often they had simply feared his reaction. And when the bracelet disappeared, he asked. Vanessa's voice became smaller. I thought if I admitted the cabinet was broken, I would lose my job before anyone checked what happened. So you let Clara stand there accused. Vanessa looked at Clara. Yes. The answer was painful because it was complete. Clara did not soften it. You knew you gave me the box. Yes. And you stayed silent. Vanessa swallowed. Yes. Richard's jaw tightened. You are dismissed. No, Clara said. The word was quiet, but it stopped him. Richard stared at her. She allowed you to be blamed. She did. She should face consequences. Clara looked toward the staff near the walls. But firing her in this room would let everyone believe the problem began with her fear instead of with the reason for it. Richard glanced at the employees. Some looked surprised. Others looked almost relieved that someone had finally named what they lived with every day. Eleanor fastened the recovered bracelet around her wrist. The young woman is right, she said. Punishing the weakest person available is what created this mess. Richard absorbed the sentence without protest. Marcus stepped beside Clara. Jonathan Bennett is on his way. He has also requested that the board's ethics council join remotely. Richard looked toward the ballroom entrance, then at the anniversary banner hanging above the stage. 50 years of leadership, it declared in gold letters. He had never questioned what kind. Clara, he said, what do you want to happen now? She looked at him carefully. I want the complete record preserved. I want every employee who reported the broken cabinet protected from retaliation. I want Vanessa held responsible for her silence, but not used to protect you from yours. Richard lowered his eyes. And what responsibility do you believe is mine? Clara did not hesitate. You created a room where telling you the truth felt more dangerous than letting an innocent person carry the blame. The ballroom remained still. Richard had negotiated mergers, closed failing properties, and faced rooms full of hostile investors without losing his command. Yet he could not find a professional phrase large enough to hide behind. "You are right," he said. Vanessa looked up. Several employees did too. Richard turned toward the guests. "The accusation against Clara Bennett was false. I made it publicly, without evidence, and I acted in a way no employee should ever have to endure." His voice faltered, then steadied. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a failure of judgment and leadership. Clara watched him, not impressed, not satisfied, only attentive. Richard continued. "The gala is over. The investigation into this incident begins tonight, and I will not direct it." At that moment, the ballroom doors opened. Jonathan Bennett entered beside a woman carrying a legal folder. He did not rush toward Richard. He walked first to Clara and asked one question. "What do you need from me?" Clara looked at her father, then at the employees still waiting near the walls. "Do not save me," she said. "Make sure the truth protects the next person too." Jonathan Bennett stood beside Clara without touching the authority that still followed his name. The woman with the legal folder introduced herself as Margaret Sloan, Independent Ethics Counsel to the Vale Meridian Board. She asked Marcus Reed to preserve the full video record, employee statements, maintenance reports, and communication logs from the event. No one was permitted to remove or alter a document. Richard Vale listened in silence. For the first time that evening, he was present without controlling the process. Jonathan looked at him across the ballroom. "You built a company large enough to impress people who never see how it treats those carrying the trays," he said. Tonight they saw. Richard did not defend himself. "I know." "No," Jonathan replied. "You know what happened. That is not the same as understanding why it happened." Clara looked toward Vanessa Cole, who still held her clipboard as though letting go might make her disappear. Margaret asked Vanessa to provide a complete statement. Vanessa admitted that she had ignored the cabinet warning, transferred the velvet box to Clara without explanation, and remained silent when suspicion turned toward her. "I was afraid," she said. Margaret's voice remained neutral. "Afraid of what?" Vanessa looked at Richard. "Of being the person who brought him a problem during the most important event of the year." Richard absorbed the answer without looking away. Clara then gave her statement. She described the loose latch, the box, the accusation, the refusal to review evidence, and the moment Richard acted without restraint. She did not exaggerate. She did not soften it. Each fact stood on its own. When Margaret finished, Jonathan asked Clara whether she wanted to leave. "Not yet," she said. "The staff should hear what happens next." Richard looked toward the employees gathered near the walls. Some had worked for the company longer than he had known their names. He stepped toward the center of the ballroom. "Clara Bennett was falsely accused because I allowed urgency, pride, and status to replace judgment," he said. "I also acted in a way that violated the standards this company claims to uphold. I am sorry to her, to the employees who witnessed it, and to every person who has learned to stay silent around me." His apology did not erase the event, and his face showed that he understood this. "Effective immediately, I am stepping away from daily operations while the board conducts an independent review." A murmur moved through the room. One of the board members began to speak, but Jonathan raised a hand. "This is not a public relations pause," he said. "The review must examine reporting systems, retaliation fears, maintenance escalation, management conduct, and executive accountability." Margaret nodded. "The board will also establish temporary protections for every employee who participates." Richard looked at Vanessa. "You will remain employed during the review, but you will be removed from event oversight until the facts are complete." Vanessa's eyes filled, though she did not cry. "That is fair." Clara watched the exchange carefully. "And the employees who reported the cabinet?" Margaret answered. "Their records will be reviewed for any retaliation, and they will be protected from further action." Jonathan then placed the old brass key on the table between himself and Richard. "Do you remember this?" Richard looked at the faded number 12. "The first hotel. The first room key we could not afford to replace." Jonathan's voice softened, but not his meaning. "We used to say a guest should feel safe before they felt impressed." Richard nodded. "I remember. You forgot that employees are part of that promise." Clara looked at the key her father had carried for decades. It was not proof of wealth. It was proof that the company had once been small enough to understand consequence. Richard turned to her. "I cannot ask you to forgive me." "No," Clara said. You cannot. Then what can I do? She looked toward the staff. Build a system where the next waitress does not need a powerful father before anyone believes her. Richard lowered his eyes. That will be done. Jonathan studied him. Not promised. Measured. Richard nodded once. Outside the tall windows, Boston traffic moved through the wet streets. Inside, the anniversary banners still celebrated leadership. But for the first time that night, leadership was no longer being measured by who commanded the room. It was being measured by who was finally willing to answer for what the room had become. 1 year later, the old brass key marked 12 rested inside a glass case in the training room of the Vale Meridian Grand. Beneath it, a simple plaque carried a sentence chosen by the employees rather than the board. Truth should never require permission from power. Clara Bennett stood near the back of the room as a new group of managers completed the company's revised accountability program. She had returned to school after the gala, finished her hospitality management degree, and joined an independent employee standards committee after graduation. She did not receive an executive title because of her father. She did not want one. Her authority came from the work itself, from asking difficult questions before mistakes became habits, and from making sure the people closest to a problem were heard first. Vanessa Cole remained with the company after the investigation. She accepted a reduced role, completed management training, and later helped design a confidential reporting system for event staff. Her silence had consequences, but it did not become a convenient wall protecting everyone above her. Marcus Reed now reported directly to the board's ethics committee whenever executive conduct involved security evidence. Maintenance requests affecting guest property could no longer be closed by event managers. Every complaint created a record that no single executive could erase. Richard Vale returned to limited leadership after 8 months, but not as the same man who had once treated speed as proof of strength. The board placed permanent oversight around his decisions. Employees were given independent channels to challenge him. He accepted both conditions without argument. On the anniversary of the gala, Richard entered the training room while Clara was reviewing a case study with new supervisors. He stopped beside the glass case and looked at the key. "Your father told me you chose the plaque," he said. "The employees chose it," Clara replied. "I only asked them what they wished someone had understood earlier." Richard nodded. A training manager approached with a report about a missing guest envelope. The details were incomplete. A housekeeper had been the last employee inside the room. A year earlier, Richard might have demanded a name before hearing a timeline. Instead, he looked at the manager and asked, "What do we know, and what are we only assuming?" The manager paused, then answered carefully. "We know the envelope was seen at 10 in the morning. We know the room was serviced at 11. We do not know whether the guest moved it before leaving. Then protect the records, speak to everyone involved, and do not accuse anyone until the facts are complete." Clara watched him sign the review request. The change was not dramatic. No applause followed. That was what made it real. Later that afternoon, Jonathan Bennett arrived for the annual ethics meeting. He stood beside Clara near the windows overlooking downtown Boston. "Do you think he changed?" he asked. Clara watched Richard listening to a front desk employee explain a scheduling problem without interrupting. "I think he learned that power can be measured by what it refuses to do to Q."